Thanks very much for that, Lee. And as you can see, three very complex procedures. One of them has two distinct parts: the part-time for a temporary period, or part-time on a permanent basis. We'll send out after the session the full presentation and the PowerPoint slides, and we'll cover now, myself, Lee, and Nuala. We'll cover a few sort of practicalities of applying for part-time working, and then we'll respond to any questions that you have. I think for me, the issue that we have is members should apply for what they want rather than merely agreeing what the school offer them. So if there are any concerns or any issues, come and contact the union before you submit your application rather than afterwards. It's always easier for us to address the issues at the start. The rationale for the three different procedures, just to re-emphasize what Lee has explained for us, the temporary variation of contract was always designed for short-term issues. My partner has fell and broke their leg. I need to be at home a few days a week, so I only need this arrangement for 3 months. Can I go part-time for 3 months? And you put the application in, and that's how it's dealt with. It was never envisaged that the temporary variation of contract would last a year and then be renewed a following year and a following year. And in our view, that would be very close to an abuse of the procedure and not what it was designed for. The flexible working procedure, as Lee has outlined, that's the key procedure. And the reason why there's the 3-year option in it is the vast majority of teachers are women. The vast majority of those women teachers who apply for flexible working do so for caring responsibilities or in connection with childcare. So what we find is mum goes off and has a baby. Most of the maternity year, baby's 1. You then want to go part-time for 3 years to get you to the point where the child is then ready to start school, and you can consider then it's appropriate for me to go back to work full-time, or actually this part-time arrangement is working fine and I want to make it a permanent arrangement. So that's the rationale for the 3 years part-time. The job share, again, as Lee has outlined, an awful lot of schools use the jargon of job share. If you work in a post-primary school and you work 3 days a week, your timetables pro rata 3/5. So you're not sharing that job with anybody as such. In a primary school, it's slightly different. If you're a P4 teacher and you go part-time 2 days a week, the P4 kids need another teacher for the other 3 days that you're not there, and that's where the job share works quite well. As Lee has said, there is a legal entitlement to apply for flexible working. There is an obligation then on the employer, as Lee has pointed out, that they can only refuse that if there's a legitimate business reason. If the principal just doesn't like part-time working, that's not a legitimate business reason. The legitimate business reasons are set out clearly in employment law, and they are a burden of additional costs, which we would always argue if a teacher's going from full-time to part-time, there's a reduced cost, not an increased cost. It would have a detrimental effect on the ability to meet demand. So again, if you're able to say in advance of putting your application in, have a look at the needs of the school and factor that in. The inability to reorganize work amongst existing staff, that's something that the employer could say is too complex for them. The inability to recruit additional staff, that shouldn't be an issue because, sorry folks. Still hear me okay, hopefully. The impact on performance, again, is an issue that the employer could turn down. But the key to all of this is the employer should only turn down an application if they're clear that their business case is robust and we can appeal against it. If the appeal is unsuccessful, then we would quite often argue that because almost all applications are women, turning down the application is sex discrimination, and we would be taking a legal opinion on that.
Alistair, just can I just say there, yep. As I said in the presentation, if you didn't hear it, unfortunately there was a sound issue there, but the flexible working works so well right across the board in all the different sectors. So if there was an appeal and you were refused, then there is still a case there, because there are comparators right throughout, and all, as I said, in all sectors. So I don't know, my sound's cut out too, and I'm muting and unmuting, but carry on, Alistair.
Okay. The other thing just to factor in, the application that you're making, you need to be explicit in the application. I wish to apply for 3 days, and my preference is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There might be a bit of discussion and negotiation with the school that they might say for timetabling, it'd be better if it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and that's a negotiation. What we don't want to happen, and it can happen if your application isn't clear, is that the school would say, we're happy to accommodate a pro rata 3/5 contract, and then spread your 3/5 of a timetable over 4 days and create all sorts of trapped time within that. So be careful that you're not asking for 3/5 of a timetable, you're asking for 3 specific days. Just checking if there's any other questions in the chat. Is there a date that requests for flexible working needs to be received by the principal, as it is for a job share? Our view would always be that the fact that schools are timetabling for the following academic year from February onwards, if you know it's your intention to request flexible working, get in as early as you can, because then that application can be factored into the school's plan before the timetable is set. The idea of putting an application in the last week in June, there's a fair chance the school will just turn that down without even considering it. So get it in as soon as possible. Our view would always be, if you can get it in by the end of January, that's a good time. So now is the perfect time to be thinking of the following year. Again, the procedures are designed that each case is looked at on its own merits. So if something unexpected cropped up that had an impact on your arrangements, where you needed to make an application at some other time for a transfer to part-time working quicker than the normal cycle, that can be accommodated. But again, you're leaving the school with less time to plan for it. So yes, you can apply, not almost at all times, but the earlier you do apply, the better. There's another question there.
Yeah, I see that's about the Mondays in relation to bank holidays, etc. And I think the issue is there that regardless of what you need to remember is a full-time teacher is 195 days in the year, 5 of which are baker days and 5 of which are staff development days, which are at the discretion of the department really to give us up to 5. So basically you should be working, if you're working 3 days a week, you should be working 3/5. So you should not be working more than 3/5 of the 195. So you need to work out with your principal that if you're taking Mondays off and the school is closed on a lot of Mondays, that then you have to work out whether you get days back in lieu or whether you get paid extra for those. Those are, again, back to what Alistair was talking about, negotiations in relation to with the principal and or board of governors. But it's generally the principal you work out the detail with. So you need to be very cognizant of that in relation to, and there is an onus in many ways on the teacher to look at all of that and to try and think it through. But that is a very important one, and one that gets missed regularly. And you may need to look at it every year, because even if you're off every Monday, the holidays the following year could be different. So you need to check every year, if you're doing this for longer than 1 year, in relation to what your the number of days you should actually be working. Sorry, Alistair.
That's fine, Nuala, and my apologies again. There's some technical hitches here that we can't get Nuala and Lee's camera switched on, so my apologies for that. Another couple of questions. If my principal turns down my request to work part-time, says that she can't find a sub to cover my 1 day, do I have a case to appeal? Absolutely, we'd be encouraging you to appeal for that.
There's another one there, Alistair.
Ahead,
I've been advised not to apply for flexible working as I do not have children. Well, that doesn't matter because anyone can apply. You don't have to necessarily have current responsibilities. It's open for anybody to apply for any particular reason. And so, you know, that shouldn't be considered at all. And there again, similarly, if another member of staff is availing of the scheme, can that impact on the application? Well, and from where I'm sitting, that would only serve to be helpful, because if it works for that person, then there's no reason why it shouldn't work for you. Yeah.
I mean, in relation to that, actually, I have heard anecdotally, but I have heard a teacher say that their principal has said she's not going to let anybody work part-time, which is in essence what this is. She doesn't have that choice. And in fact, in relation to that particular principal, I did manage to get somebody on part-time, even though the attitude was that she wasn't going to give the person part-time. Basically what happened was the principal did not know how to work out the part-time. And once we got the employment authorities involved to work with the principal on that, it all went through very smoothly. So there are things that you do have to be careful of. If you are being turned down, come to the union. We'll be able to advise you as to whether that's a reasonable turn down or not. And I think that's where it may be a case where if they can't get somebody, and there may be legitimately at times, and particularly at the minute because we have a shortage of teachers, but they should still be doing everything and advertising the post if it is for 6 months or more. It should be advertised. So there's a lot of things that can be done. So don't be taking sort of just everything you hear. Check it out.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the job share scheme, we talked about it in the presentation there, that there were differences in the schemes. The job share scheme, there's a stipulation in that there needs to be a partner found for the other part of your job, but the flexible working doesn't include that. So as Nuala said, you know, you need to check out everything before you agree to everything. And that's, I suppose, a reason why the meeting within the 28 days is important as well, because you can hear what your principal has to say and what they're recommending you do, but then you come to the union and you discuss it with us, and we can take you through the different steps. Yeah.
Thanks, Lee. There's another question there, folks, about is flexible working a temporary arrangement for 3 years or permanent? Again, it's whenever you apply, you need to be explicit on what you're applying for. If you're wanting to go part-time on a permanent basis, then you just quote the TNC procedure. But if you want it to be for the temporary arrangements for up to 3 years, you need to quote the specific paragraph in the TNC document. I think it's 8.6, but your letter would say, I wish this application to be for no more than 3 years under paragraph 8.6. So again, you need to be explicit at the start. There's another point there about teaching allowances, and Lee did touch on this in the initial presentation. Teaching allowances are awarded teaching allowance 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There is no provision for a part of a teaching allowance to be used. There is a provision for the teaching allowance to be shared. Our view, and the view of all the unions, and we took a case to tribunal and won, and it is known in the education field as the Larne Amendment, because what we were able to argue was, if I go part-time to 3 days a week and I have a teaching allowance, if I can display that I can cover that duty in the 3 days that I'm working, I get the full point. So 3/5 of salary, but 100% of the point. And I'll give you an example. If I'm head of department, two things happen. Number one, I'm teaching a lot of the time. So if I'm your head of department, you can't access me as your head of department for much of the working day because I'm teaching, and so are you. So the idea of a full-time head of department is a bit strange. The other element is, if I can attend the senior teachers meeting on a Monday, I can hold a departmental meeting on a Tuesday, and I'm timetabled for my head of department admin on a Wednesday. There's very little that won't wait until the following Monday when I come back to work after my part-time hours. The difference would be if the teaching allowance is for a pastoral role. If you're in a pastoral role or a child protection role or a designated teacher role, and you aren't in the school, somebody else has to cover that duty for the days that you're not there. So in that situation, it would be appropriate for me to go part-time, work my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3/5 of salary and 3/5 of the point, and then somebody else can be the deputy for that role on the Thursday and Friday, and they would get 2/5 of the point. So the totality is one teaching allowance is still being used. Hopefully that covers the pro rata element of it.
Yeah, and I would say though that would be on a temporary basis. When you do, or if you decide to go back to your full-time role, then the point is returned to you as full-time coordinator or whatever it is. And also if you would be taking on the point within your reduced hours, it doesn't mean that you do the work on the Thursday and Friday when you're off. It means that you do the work on the days that you're working, but you cover whatever needs to be done for the Thursday and Friday. So there's no way that you'll be working the 5 days and simply being paid for the 3 days, and that applies to the whole of your reduced hours. It doesn't mean you sit at home on the Thursday and Friday and do your planning and so on. It means everything you do for those reduced hours is done on the 3 days or the 4 days or whatever you've chosen.
Thanks, Lee. There's a couple of questions there on the impact on pensions. So I'm going to be cheeky and I'll answer one and maybe Nuala could answer the other one. Can I drop a day for 3 years and then move into phased retirement? Yes, you can. And what you could do is if you're over 55, you can apply for phased retirement. And what that means is if you reduce your salary to 80% of what it is now, either through reducing your hours or reducing your duties, then you can apply for up to 75% of your pension and your pension lump sum. If you're under 65, that will be actuarially reduced. If you're already at normal retirement age, there's no reduction, and you can avail of that straightforward enough. The phased retirement, there is a specific piece of guidance and a very, very useful DE fact sheet. So if after the meeting, some of us, Fiona, will get that sent out to you, and then maybe we'll take the query offline and provide some more specific advice to your question.
I take it the next question is about how flexible work can affect your pension.
Go for it.
Well, basically, if you're working 3 days a week, you will only be paying 3/5 of your pension. In the care scheme, that's harder to tell you what you would be paying. But in essence, I suppose the simplest way to put this is that it would take you 5 years to make up 3 years pension. Now, it'll not be exactly that, because you'll be paying 3/5, isn't that right? 5 years to do, yeah. And basically, because the only bit that'll be in is based on your full-time hours or your full-time salary, is the bit that you will have had in the 80th scheme up to 2015, or if you're older, if you went on past that in the transition phase, or if post legislation hopefully going through Stormont at this stage, you may be able to take between 2015 and 2022 into that. But from the 1st of April 2022, all pension for everybody in the teacher scheme will be in the care scheme, which basically means that it's the average of what you are paying in, and each year that is increased by inflation. So it actually, if you look at your annual benefit statement, it actually comes up as an amount. So amount of money rather than years and days, and that is much more difficult for you to keep track of. However, the department have said that the annual benefit statement and actually access to what your pension currently is supposed to be going online this year. So it will give you more regular access to it once that goes ahead. So you will be able to check. But in essence, what you are doing is, if you're only working 3 days a week, you are only paying in the equivalent of 3/5 of your pension each year. So that's how it affects your pension. That probably wasn't very clear, but if you have any further questions, please.
And also your employer then would only be paying 3/5 of whatever their contribution would be too. So yeah. All right.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, just to say, when Alistair was talking there about phased retirement, I had a member on a week or two ago who was actually saying that they were going to retire this year and then start subbing because they wanted to sub. And I asked them, did they want to work regularly? And they said yes, that they would take, and they were asking, could they take like a temporary or a permanent part-time post? So I suggested to them they look at the phased retirement, because phased retirement is accessing some of your pension and working on a part-time basis. So if you are 55 plus, that may be the route you look at rather than the flexible working or the temporary variations, etc. That may be the route, and it is definitely worth looking into with the union's financial advisors if you are in that age bracket.
Yep.
Thanks, Nuala. There's another question here. I've just finished flexible working for 3 years and was only paid teaching allowance pro rata. No one else was doing my role. Would I have a case to ask for that shortfall to be paid back? Again, that's I wouldn't want to be putting any guarantee that we would have a successful outcome in that one. It would be better if that was dealt with at the application stage, that you'd be saying, I want to go 3 days a week, but I want the full point because I can do the duties, and if nobody else is doing it. It's always harder to win an argument retrospectively, but certainly that's something that we would look at, and whichever union you're in, I would suggest after the meeting make contact with one of the 3 officials here, and we'll certainly give you more tailored advice on that one. But again, it emphasizes the importance of getting the application right at the start, so you know exactly what you're applying for and what you're going to get.
And I think also in relation to that, Alistair, you would need to have been doing the work of the full-time post, not doing it, and be able to show that as well to be able to appeal it at that point. I see there's a question there about if doing flexible working and then go on to maternity leave, what the maternity pay would be based on, whether it's on flexible working hours or full-time hours. And basically the answer to that is that the department have a formula in which they work out maternity pay, and it's based on roughly, without going into the full thing, but 15 weeks before your due date. And whatever you are working at that point, so they will look at the average around, they take a week, etc. But basically, if you've been working for a year doing flexible working, then it is likely that your maternity leave and your maternity pay will be based on your flexible working hours. But you can check that with the department in relation to what pay you would actually be on when you're due to go on maternity leave. But that is one thing to keep in mind if you are thinking of doing flexible working, because obviously the maternity pay is not the best scheme that we have, though we have tried to improve it. So it's better if it's based on full time rather than part time.
Yeah. And just on that as well, we've had cases where somebody's maybe done flexible working for a year and then have gone off on maternity, and we've been able to get their flexible working paused so that they can resume it, if you like, or start again after their maternity leave is over. So you know that year isn't kind of wasted on within the 3 years, if you know what I mean. I don't know about the other two, if you've seen that as well. That depends if the person wants that. Some people actually don't want that. They want to actually then, because they've been on maternity pay, etc., maybe on no pay, they want to go back to full-time hours. But yes, that is the case. Yeah, it's something that can be considered. Yeah.
Thanks. There's another question there. With flexible working, can you confirm that it is permitted to sub through NISTRA, or is this case by case by approval from boards of governors? The employment law arrangements allow for, it's actually called part-time workers prevention of less favorable treatment. So if you go part-time and you only work in the school 3 days a week, what you do outside of that is largely your business. However, if you're a full-time teacher and wanted to have a second job in the evenings or whatever, you would still be obliged to seek your employer's permission to do that. So it's the same for part-time, that they would be treated the same as a full-time member of staff, that you should be able to ask your board of governors for permission to do that. Again, that's an issue that comes up quite often, but from a legal point of view, I suppose, what you do in your own time outside of employment is largely up to you. But the school may have an issue around, if it's almost like in business terms, would you be working for a competitor of your employer? So there's some issues around that, but certainly working part-time, you should be treated no less favorably than a full-time equivalent. So you go through the same process, asking for the approval of the Board of Governors.
I think it's something you need to consider, though, that if you're on a temporary variation rather than a permanent flexible working or part-time arrangement, because if you're seeking flexible working and or a temporary variation on the basis that you need time with your family, or you're not fit to work full-time, and then you sub, you could actually be causing issues in trying to get that extended or made permanent. So you need to be sort of careful of the optics in relation to all this as well. But I mean, there's plenty of people I know who are maybe doing job share, and when their job share partner is not able to come in, the school actually bring them in to sub, you know, or they ask them to do so. So, you know, it can work in various different ways, just depending on where you work.
Yeah. There's another question there.
Is that on what grounds are you entitled to phased retirement?
You want to cover that, Neela?
Can your employer refuse? It's basically the same as in relation to, you know, if you're asking for something reasonable, it comes back to this is something that you should be able to do, but they have to make every opportunity to facilitate you. However, I have had in the past where somebody wasn't able to get it, and the reason they weren't, and we did appeal, etc. as well, was because it was I can't remember whether it was I think it was a maths teacher, and they literally could not get a maths teacher. So his phased retirement, I think he got 1 day rather than 2 days, you know, in relation to it, because they physically couldn't, they didn't have enough maths teachers in the school, and they couldn't, and they had tried, and they were able to show that they had advertised, they haven't been able to get. So there are times when it can't happen, but they are very, very rare. It should, and to say, I think it all depends, as in everything, what the reasons are. And if the reasons are that just they just don't know how to facilitate it, they don't want to, that's not acceptable. I think it's down to the fact that if they cannot fill the post, it's like a part-time, the reason for it. But as I said, that is a very rare occasion.
Thanks, Neela. There was a question earlier up the list of questions, and I don't want to miss it, but it was around the issue of, if you haven't got childcare or children, are you allowed to apply for flexible working? Before April 2015, the right to request flexible working only applied to parents of children under 17, or 18 in the case of parents of disabled children, or those caring for an adult. That changed in legislation in April 2015, and now any eligible employee can apply to work flexibly for any reason. Lee referenced in her presentation that we are in discussions with the employers around a revised flexible working procedure. That issue might be addressed in that, because the flexible working TNC procedure dates back to 2008, and it hasn't technically been updated to reflect that change in 2015. So whilst the TNC procedure and principals understanding of it might be that you're only allowed to apply for flexible working if you've got young children, that is no longer the case in law. So what we would be saying is, again, seek advice from us before you apply, and we would be making it explicit in the application. And if we needed to, we would be referencing the 2015 legislation to say, under employment law, I am entitled to make a request, with the proviso that the employer only has to consider it and can indeed turn it down if they have legitimate business reasons, in the same way as any other application. But that old rule of only being applicable to parents of young children or carers of young children has been changed in recent years.
And I think increasingly we're seeing actually where people are carers of parents or elderly relatives, which is actually because I suppose with people living longer, etc., that we are beginning to see a lot more of that, and people having to take a lot more people maybe looking for temporary variations or flexible working to actually care for elderly relatives. So I mean, that is becoming more of the norm, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thanks, Neela. I'm not going to name anybody, but somebody says thank you and sorry for so many questions. No apology needed, because that's what we're here for, folks.
Exactly.
What I would say as well, just if you want to take another minute or two for any final questions, the TNC procedure has an application form attached. It's part of a PDF and it's fairly sort of, robust. But what we have developed, and we're happy to share it with you, is a Word document version of that you can populate with your own personal circumstances. But again, just to emphasize, the key point is if you're considering an application, feel free to come and talk to any one of us and get some initial advice before you do, because it's easier for us to have an influence at the start rather than having to get into a messy appeal where if we appeal the decision and the appeal is handled by the Board of Governors, the first thing they'll say is, why did you not put that in your application? And it makes everybody look a bit foolish. So feel free to come to us and ask for help and guidance. Likewise, anybody who's considering phased retirement or any other element of it, myself and Nuala sit on the Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme Advisory Board and working closely with Liam and colleagues in UTU. We have the information and the knowledge as well as the contacts in the department, so feel free to use that as a resource. Another question's popped up there. Is it possible to take phased retirement without accessing pension funds until 60? It wouldn't be phased retirement if you didn't apply for part of your pension.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be going phased retirement as in applying for your pension. You would be going part-time in preparation for ultimate retirement. But it's sort of if you went part-time, you could say I'm partially retired, but that's not the same as actually accessing your pension benefits before 60. But certainly the key is, as Nuala has said, if you are considering applying for your pension benefits in full or under the phased retirement before your normal retirement age, seek financial advice before you make any crucial decisions. None of us are qualified to give you financial advice. We're not regulated by FSA or anything, but all three unions have financial advice services free for members. So, make use of that service.
Okay, and that would apply to that question there that's just come up there. I was previously told that reducing hours does not affect pension entitlement. It does depend on which scheme you're in, and that's why the advice is to seek further financial information in terms of how your reduced hours would impact on you specifically, depending on your individual circumstances. Yeah.
And can I just say that whoever told you that reducing hours did not affect pension entitlement, yes, in the full final salary scheme, it was based on full-time pay, but it was still the amount of days you worked would have been taken into account. So it would always have affected your pension entitlement, even though it was based on full pay. If you were only working 4 days in that year, you would only have 4/5 of that year, because that's only you only get pension entitlement for the days and hours that you actually work. I think that's important.
Yeah. Thanks, Nuala. There was another question there. Just a second to find it. Can I apply through flexible working scheme to reduce my daily hours as opposed to reducing the number of days, e.g. working until 2 p.m? What we should have emphasized at the start is that under employment law, flexible working is a very, very broad term, and it can mean anything from a compressed week, shorter days, or reduced number of days. So technically, yes, we fall into the trap sometimes of using it as a part-time working is a term that's sort of used as jargon rather than actually anything explicit. But certainly there's nothing stopping you putting in an application to work those hours, particularly if you have a rationale for it, for example, looking after your own kids or whatever it happens to be. But certainly you could apply for that working pattern in the same way as full days. So the answer to that question is yes. And again, the health warning is it'll come down to whether the school can accommodate that request or not. And again, if we get the application in early enough before the timetable is set or before the staffing is reviewed for the academic year, that's the best chance of getting a successful application. But yes, we should have made that explicit at the start. Part-time work and job share are all types of flexible working, which is a more wide scheme. What we've also found on that one, Alistair, just to say that that's easier to do in post-primary,
And what you need to be careful of in primary is that, because some people think, well, that would be the end of my teaching day, possibly, that they would finish. But you're supposed to have 1 hour's directed time for every 3 hours teaching. So that would have to be factored in, which means you wouldn't be working until 2 p.m. Or teaching to 2 p.m. and then trying to get somebody potentially to cover, say, from 1 until 2 every day is going to be very difficult for schools to accommodate. So you need to have that in mind when you are applying, as to how easily this would be or how difficult it would be for the school to actually facilitate.
Yeah, thanks, Nuala. Particularly again in the post-primary sector, where a lot of schools are moving to a 2-week timetable. It's not unusual for somebody to apply and say 3 days this week and 2 days the next week, or indeed, I suppose in theory, work a week, off a week as part of that fortnightly cycle. So again, it comes down to the key being, what is it that you want to apply for to accommodate the other work-life balance issues in your life? So get that established first, and then work with the employer, with our advice and guidance if needs be, to make a strong case that'll be successful. I don't see any. Hold on, there is another question. We're on a roll.
Yeah, see, that's in primary. You have to change year groups, as some don't like flexible working in P6-7. What are the rules around this place? There are no rules. Basically, flexible working can work in any class. I think what the issues are is some schools don't like it. But when job share came in initially, and unfortunately I've been around here long enough to actually remember it coming in, and some of the arguments we had with schools in relation to it, and their reluctance. And I mean, one of the issues was that they felt it couldn't happen in P1 because it was going to disrupt children coming into school. Children are very flexible, and if you set up flexible working and you have 2 good teachers, it can actually be more beneficial to pupils and teachers. And unfortunately, many years down the road, we are still having to try and convince some schools of this. So there aren't any rules around it. Anybody in P6-7 is entitled to apply for flexible working, the same as any other teacher, in whether they're in nursery, special needs, or whatever class they're in post-primary either.
Thanks, Nuala. Folks, I'm conscious of time, and we promised we would finish within the hour. So I think we've done our best to answer all of the questions that came up. Certainly we'll make this resource and the recording, hopefully with better sound quality, apologies at my end, we'll make that available on each of the union's websites. The information around pensions is easily available on the website, and Lee has shared our contact details for the 3 different unions. So please get in contact with us directly if there's an individual query that we can help with, or if there is an application that you want to make and you just want to run it past us. We're more than happy to help. So my apologies again for any technical glitches. That's my fault, but hopefully the session has been informative and helpful to you. And myself, Nuala and Lee have scheduled similar sessions, probably about once a month for the rest of the academic year, on a whole range of topics. So they'll be advertised as well. So feel free to come along to the next session and watch out for the recordings as well. So thanks very much, everybody, and thanks particularly to Lee for putting all the hard work in at the start on the technical side of the procedures. So
thanks to yourself, Alistair, for hosting, even though there were technical issues. Rather you than me, I wouldn't want to be doing it. So thank you for doing that.
Yes, thank you, Alistair, and thanks everybody for being here. Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Bye.